Hello all, Rick here with a video looking into another Federation starship, its origins and lore both in and out of universe. I already popped the cork on the non-canonical vessels with the Theseus class, and this time it's another starship that has not turned up on screens or even with a mention, the Vesta class, as represented by the USS Aventine. Mack created the original Vesta class design and based it on the Intrepid and Dauntless classes as the prior users of Slipstream drive technology, a key feature of the Vesta. This was incorporated with the overall profile of the Sovereign class and took in design elements from the Excelsior and a prior design made by Raidmaker called the USS Spirit, which has not appeared in stories. The first appearance, in text, of the Vesta class was in the first of the Star Trek Destiny novels in 2008, although it was not depicted on the covers until the later German editions of the novels. Its first reveal was in 2010 in a Ships of the Line calendar. The class was named after the Roman goddess of hearth, home and family from their pantheon, whose Greek equivalent is Hestia. This is also why there were 7 initial ships, each named for a hill of Rome. In universe, the Vesta class began its construction soon after Voyager's return from the Delta Quadrant, and the prototype was completed in 2380, barely 2 years later. The construction was helmed at Utopia Planitia Fleet Yards, while other systems were developed at Proxima and Aurora Borealis Incorporated at Regulus. As stated before in prior ships that originated around this time, Voyager's return heralded a major boom in technology for the Federation, considering the haul of information and even working developments they had brought back from their journey. While some of this was classified due to Temporal Prime directives, much was still fair game for Starfleet to dissect and reverse engineer. The Vesta class was to be the first new exploration cruiser able to tackle multiple mission profiles akin to those impeccable flagship classes, the Excelsior and Galaxy. The Odyssey class would ultimately take on this role, but that was several years behind the Vesta, so in many ways this class can be seen as a trial run on creating a next-generation exploration starship. Many of its systems were therefore experimental, with new propulsion systems and the most advanced adaptive sensors in the fleet at the time of its launch. Those propulsion systems were not only a new warp system, basically the same as before with tweaks, but also the first quantum slipstream drive. The Vesta, being the testbed for this ability, seems to have since been supplanted by the Canon ships, but I'll get to that later. The prototype was the USS Vesta NX 82601, quickly rechristened the USS Aventine NCC 82601, when it entered service the same year. 6 more ships followed suit, and by 2381 there were 7 of these new exploration ships out there, each named for a hill of Rome. But then the project suffered a roadblock. The Utopia Planitia attack, which I have to make a conscious effort to not refer to as the Mars attacks, occurred in 2385 and halted development on this project. Additionally, the Odyssey class had entered production at this time, and the foundations built by the Vesta were converted to the more ambitious and successful Odyssey-style cruiser. According to both Star Trek Online and the Adventures RPG, the Vesta eventually resumed production at other shipyards post-2390 with a refit program that was postponed until 2399 to update their hardware and software systems, keeping them up to date with the latest developments. Despite delays, it seems to eventually get to fulfill its destiny. The class was designed a multi-mission explorer, which is pretty self-explanatory. It undertook multiple missions in a row and was outfitted to support as many scenarios as were predicted. The Vesta class is 672 meters long, and it reminds me of a shark. It was 195 meters wide and 88 tall, weighing 3.3 million metric tons. It spanned 23 decks, although 26 and 30 were referenced, and it had a crew of 750 and a maximum emergency capacity of 3,500. The sensor systems were the most advanced in the fleet at its launch date of 2380, and this is because it was basically trialling the new systems complete with an advanced computer core. That's the thing with advanced systems, they only remain that way until they are standard. It should be noted that there is a secondary deflector array, much as there was on the Intrepid class, which itself was dedicated to maintaining sensor acuity over long ranges, and there are numerous exposed sensor strips dotted around the hull, as well as the return of the planetary sensor dome. This included a multi-dimensional wave function analysis module for the specific detection of interdimensional rifts, something that came in useful for mapping and locating Borg transwarp apertures. The warp systems were a new design, capable of reaching warp 9.99, possibly being the first in the fleet able to do so with any degree of stability. This was later routine by the turn of the century, but still a notable achievement. At sublight speeds, it was also very quick with 4 impulse drives and very nimble. But of course, the biggest addition was the Quantum Slipstream drive. This was to be the first foray into using the drive full time. However, it proved to be rather temperamental. The plan was to have it theoretically travel at 310 light years per hour, and it could cover the Milky Way in 2 weeks or so. But this did not come to pass, as the drive would overheat after only 2 hours of use, and the cooldown and repair took around 2 to 3 days to complete. So, just as the Theseus played with the idea of proto-warp, and the Protostar actually refined it, the Vesta seems to be the first overreach into the QSD, before the Dauntless picked up that development proper. At least this could be where the Vesta fits into canon. One of the biggest problems for the Slipstream drive, that of calculating sensor corrections before they were on top of the variations, was overcome with the Chronoton integrator. This essentially allowed sensors to ping forwards in time by a couple of seconds, giving the computer more time to calculate needed corrections while running at slipstream speeds. Likewise, the quantum field focus controller compensated for shipboard systems while messing with slipstream. The drives of the Vesta classes were constantly being tinkered and overhauled as Starfleet learned how to implement the QSD with greater sustainability. In terms of armaments, the Vesta class sports a reserved number of Mark 10 phaser strips, with 4 on the saucer and 3 on the underside. A refreshingly modest amount, although they were unusually long. The 2 on the pylons actually follow the curvature all the way around, and the top saucers ones, they reach far enough back so that it can effectively fire over its shoulder to target behind it, explaining the lack of rear-facing strips. However, at the front of the ship, it can support a Mark 12 dual heavy phaser cannon, so firepower is optional. Its torpedo tubes, however, are a little more numerous. There are 2 rear-facing ones, then there are 4 that face forwards split into 2 positions. Additionally, there are 4 more launchers over the main deflector, however I suspect that these are genuinely used as probe launchers instead, considering their placement. This is just suspicion, but I'm going to mark them down as 4 more dual-purpose ones, because let's face it, if they fit a probe, they can probably fit a photon. Its defensive systems were also rather impressive, considering it had an array of shield adaptations it could perform, including a graviton-based one that actually allowed it to get closer to intense gravitational fields without succumbing to its effects. This means that yes, despite its size, it was capable of planetary landings, although I shudder to think what would happen if it was completely depowered when it was on the ground. Probably would not lift off again. It also has a Fermion field generator, which I don't know, it's classified. ST Online interprets it as somehow reversing damage or reinforcing hull strength. The bridge was also still at the top of the vessel, but now sunken into the overall design with a cutout for the 4 view screen/window. For auxiliary vessels, it had 2 shuttle bays and contained several Danube-class runabouts as well as an array of shuttlecraft. The extended landing pad out back was there to allow large ships to land and be carried if they did not fit inside the hangars. Other systems included 20 transporter rooms, including its cargo and evacuation systems. In many ways, I see the Vesta class as what could have been instead of the Odyssey. And in fact, in the Destiny timeline of the books, it's exactly that. The latter was larger and a more grandiose style cruiser that did everything the Vesta did, but better, and the two projects were separated by only a couple of years. The Vesta did not perform badly, by any means. In fact, it exceeded expectations. Starfleet could have easily incorporated their learned developments into the Vesta design going forwards, but instead, they chose to either shelve the design or just went straight with other projects. The notion that the line gets revived later on is one that I'm also in two minds about, because the role it occupied is pretty much covered by other ships of the era, but as hopefully I have illustrated, it was a proven design, even more so after the kinks had been ironed out, so honestly, it could go either way I think. Of course, the reason we don't see the Vesta in canon is twofold. Firstly, series like Prodigy and Picard aired and showcased the USS Dauntless and the Odyssey-class Enterprise F respectively. The Dauntless is unequivocally the Federation's first foray into Slipstream drive, as it was built on the schematics of the original Species 116 Dauntless, even resembling that vessel. Additionally, we have the introduction of the Voyager A, which is a Lamar class, and likely taking even more of the Vesta's thunder. So the Vesta is unlikely to be the testbed in the canon of the shows, but it still exists in spin-off media. Personally, I think if this ship ever is introduced into the shows, I'd be happy to see it without this QSD testbed history, even though it is kind of a key feature. Honestly though, I doubt we ever would see it, considering it was created for the books and therefore has some differing intellectual property things associated with it, but so was the Lunar class, and now that is canon. And the Odyssey was made for Star Trek Online, and now that is the canonical Enterprise F, so never say never. The Vesta class has made its way into my favourite designs, and I think now sits at the top of the list for official but unimplemented starships in the show. The USS Aventine saw a lot of action against the Borg, and represented that the Federation, as well as its longtime adversary, has the ability to adapt. In at least one timeline out there, the Odyssey class never came to be, and this was the new deep space exploration craft of the late 24th century, while simultaneously paving the way for Slipstream trials. That's an important vessel, and while folding it into the shows might diminish that somewhat, I think I would still love to see it. Thanks for watching this breakdown on the Vesta class starship. I've been Rick, and I'll see you next time for another video. Until then, goodbye.